You'd be amazed how quickly a person can vanish, right in front of the people they gave everything to. We don't need to keep pretending she contributes. She's basically furniture at this point. That's what my son said, into a microphone, at our family's Thanksgiving dinner. He stood at the head of the table in the dining room I spent half my life maintaining, with the candles flickering behind him, and 20 guests, friends, in-laws, neighbors, all watching, listening, laughing. I stood at the sideboard, holding a dish of roasted squash, still wearing my apron, and the old pearl earrings his father gave me back when we still made time for each other. The room didn't fall silent. No one gasped. Instead, a few chuckled politely. One of the in-laws, a cousin's new wife, smiled, the way someone does when they're unsure if they should laugh or not. I didn't say anything. My husband looked at his wineglass. My daughter-in-law raised an eyebrow but said nothing, and my son just kept going, as if he hadn't just turned me invisible with a single sentence. I set the dish down carefully, adjusted the placemat under it, and stepped back. My hands were steady, but something inside me shifted. Not in an explosive way. No, it was more like the quiet snap of a thread that's been stretched too far for too long. Earlier that day, I'd been up at 4:45 a.m. to start the turkey. I prepped every dish myself. I swept the walkway, polished the silver, folded linen napkins into shapes shaped like leaves. I even ironed the tablecloth, something no one commented on, but I knew they noticed, subconsciously at least. It had taken me hours to create that warmth, but just seconds for him to dismiss me from it. I stayed quiet during dinner. I passed plates, cleared dishes, refilled wine, like I always do, like I've done for 35 Thanksgivings without once being asked to sit and rest. Because mothers don't rest. Not until everyone's full, happy, and thanking someone else for the food they barely noticed was made by hand. After dessert, store-bought, courtesy of my daughter-in-law, I took the trash out. Alone. I stood on the back porch and looked out at the garden I'd once spent whole summers planting with my son when he was little. Now it was mostly patio furniture and a patchy lawn where they planned to build an outdoor bar next spring. Somewhere behind me I heard my son say, "Don't worry about Mom, she'll clean it all up like always." They didn't know I could still hear them, or maybe they just didn't care anymore. I walked back in, wordless, not angry, not heartbroken, just hollow. I collected the wine glasses, even the ones half full, washed them, dried them, stacked them in the cabinet I organized every spring. And then Ava, my granddaughter, appeared beside me, quiet as a whisper. She tugged my apron, looked up, and said, "Grandma, you made it feel like Thanksgiving." Just that. No fanfare, no audience. But those 7 words landed louder than anything her father had said all night. Later, when the house had emptied and I sat in the guest bedroom, my bedroom apparently, I looked at the wall where my sewing machine used to be, now replaced by a Peloton. I didn't cry. I just sat there, and finally said something out loud. Maybe I don't belong here anymore. And just like that, the idea planted itself. Not bitter, not loud, just clear. If I was no longer part of this house, then maybe they shouldn't be either. I didn't always live in the guest room of my own home. Once, it was my name on the mortgage papers. I remember sitting across from the loan officer at the bank, sweat pooling in my palms, pretending to be more confident than I was. My husband had just lost his job. The recession had swallowed the factory he worked at without apology, and the bills had started arriving faster than the mailman could carry them. Still, I signed. My hands didn't shake until after I left the office. The house wasn't big. It wasn't fancy. But it was ours, or would be, if we worked hard enough. And I worked hard. Harder than I thought a person could without breaking. I picked up weekend shifts at the diner, then graveyard shifts at the care facility 2 towns over. I crocheted scarves and sold them at the flea market. I clipped coupons like it was a full-time job. I watered down soup so it stretched for 2 meals instead of 1. I counted every penny, and even then, we were short. So I started selling my jewelry. Piece by piece, the collection my mother gave me was reduced to empty velvet boxes. My engagement ring went first. Then the gold necklace I wore to my son's christening. Finally, the earrings I had on the night I met my husband, sold to pay for textbooks, braces, rent. I didn't tell anyone, not my son, not my husband, not because I didn't trust them, but because I didn't want them to feel the weight. That was my job. I was the cushion, the glue, the silent promise that everything would hold together. My son, Daniel, grew up with packed lunches and handmade Halloween costumes and field trip forms always signed on time. He never saw the nights I stood in front of the fridge with a spoon, eating cold beans because I didn't want to waste a clean dish. He never knew how many times I begged the power company for an extension. And that was fine. It meant I did my job right. I kept hoping all of it, every sacrifice, would be a seed planted in love. That someday, when Daniel became a man, he'd look back and say, "Mom, you gave up so much. Thank you." Instead, he looked at me over turkey and stuffing and said I was furniture. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then, Daniel was sweet, thoughtful. He used to write me little cards on scrap paper. "To the best mom in the world," scrawled in crayon. I saved them in a tin box under the bed. Sometimes I still look at them, though the ink is faded and the corners curled. When he was 8, I overheard him tell a neighbor boy, "My mom can fix anything. She's like a superhero." I carried those words with me through every bad year that followed. Even when my husband started growing distant, disappointed by the way life unfolded, I stayed steady. When he gave up on himself, I kept going for all three of us. Even when Daniel drifted as a teenager, becoming sharper, colder, more embarrassed by my thrift store clothes and homemade lunches, I still hoped. There was this one Christmas. We didn't have money for gifts, not even a tree. I taped green paper to the wall in the shape of a triangle and drew little ornaments with markers. Daniel was 12. He cried when he saw it. He hugged me and whispered, "One day, I'll buy you a real tree, Mom. A big one." We never spoke of it again. When Daniel got married, I gave him the house. Not formally, no. My name stayed on the deed. But I let him and his new wife move in. Told them it was just temporary. I didn't ask for rent. I stayed in the back bedroom and offered help when needed. Cooked, cleaned, babysat, smiled. At first, they said thank you. Then, they stopped asking. Then, they stopped noticing. Then, one day, I found a note on the fridge. Not addressed to me, just instructions. "Don't forget to fold the laundry and keep Ava off screens after 7. No please, no thanks, just assumed labor. Quiet expectation, as if I'd slipped from person to appliance. Still, I stayed. I hoped. Because love does that to you. It makes you mistake erosion for stability. It makes you call rust character. The worst part? I didn't even see the shift happening. I thought I was helping. I thought I was still building something. But somewhere along the line, the foundation I laid became the floor they walked on without looking down. And I became a story no one asked to hear again. Even then, after all of that, I still clung to some tiny thread of faith. That maybe one day they'd see. That Ava would grow up and ask me about my life. That Daniel would remember the paper tree. That my husband would speak up for me again, like he did when we were young and broke but still on the same side. But people only notice the scaffolding when it's taken away. And that thread, it finally snapped at the Thanksgiving table. So no, I wasn't angry that night. I was done hoping. And sometimes, done is stronger than angry will ever be. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I woke to find my sewing machine missing. Not broken, not misplaced. Gone. In its place sat a sleek white shelf from IKEA, freshly assembled with baskets labeled mail, keys, and chargers. On top, a framed photo of my daughter-in-law smiling in front of a vineyard she'd visited with her college friends. I stood there for a moment in my robe, gripping my coffee mug. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the spot where I used to make clothes for Daniel when he was a baby, where I mended socks and stitched curtains and fixed the seams of my husband's favorite jacket. All of it was erased, organized out of existence. When I asked where the machine was, Daniel didn't even look up from his phone. "Oh," he said, "we moved it to the garage. We needed a cleaner look by the entry. You weren't really using it anymore, right?" That word again. Anymore. It followed me like mildew, seeping into every interaction. I said nothing. What was there to say that wouldn't make me sound crazy? The following weeks passed like static. I made breakfast, folded laundry, vacuumed under couches I didn't sit on. I helped Ava with her homework. I kept quiet when they talked about renovating the kitchen I once scrubbed with a toothbrush. I became a quiet shadow in their curated life. Until one day I opened the fridge and saw my name written in marker on a container of soup. Mom's, it read in bold block letters. Below it, please don't eat gluten-free. I blinked. My soup, labeled like it was part of someone's restrictive diet, not something I cooked for myself. I stood there, cold air spilling over my bare arms, trying to figure out what stung more, the fact that no one would have touched it anyway, or that they'd felt the need to make sure. That night, I sat at the dinner table with a plate of rice and roasted carrots while everyone else had steak. I wasn't asked if I wanted any. I wasn't offered a glass of wine. I just sat there, chewing, listening to my son tell a story about his house and his rules. The worst part? No one was overtly cruel. They weren't yelling. They weren't throwing things or locking me out. No, they were just quietly replacing me, slowly sanding me down until I fit the shape they needed. A helper, a placeholder, a prop. And yet I stayed. Because Ava still looked for me when she was scared at night. Because my husband still reached for my hand under the table, even if he didn't speak up, because I didn't know where else I would go, or who I would be, without being needed. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Saturday, a warm one, unusually sunny for late December. I was upstairs folding towels when I heard voices from the living room, Daniel, his wife, and someone else. I stayed quiet. I wasn't eavesdropping, I just didn't want to interrupt. We'll clear out the guest room by spring, my daughter-in-law said. Perfect, a woman's voice replied. Once we remove that wall, the light will be incredible for content creation. My blood went cold. That room's still occupied, Daniel said with a chuckle, but not for long. We're easing her into the idea of assisted living. You know how they are, can't let go of the past. They laughed. The woman added, my mom was the same. Once they're not useful, they get clingy. I gripped the folded towel so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't breathe for a second. I walked into the hallway, but my feet didn't make a sound on the carpet. I stood there, just out of sight, heart hammering like a child caught sneaking out. Anyway, Daniel continued, once it's done, it'll add value to the whole place. Backyard studio, built-in light, great for branding. Branding. That's what I was worth now. A hurdle between them and a profitable lifestyle aesthetic. I didn't confront them. I didn't make a scene. I just returned to the room, the guest room, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long, long time. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't even betrayal. It was clarity. They weren't waiting for me to leave because they were conflicted. They were planning for it, strategizing, measuring my presence like square footage, discussing my life behind closed doors in the home I had once fought to keep warm. Later that night, Daniel came to my door. He asked if I could babysit Ava the next evening. He and his wife had a gala to attend. I smiled and said yes, because of course I did. But once he left, I opened the closet. I pulled out the lockbox. Inside, the deed. Still in my name, signed, filed, ignored, because they had stopped seeing me as a person who owned anything. Just someone who existed in a corner, waiting for permission to stay. That night, I made tea. I looked around the room, at the photos that had been removed from the hallway, the bookshelf that had disappeared, the way they never asked where I wanted anything to go. I thought about the moment my son went from hugging my waist to moving me out of frame, and I realized they weren't going to tell me when it was time to leave. They were just going to make it so unbearable that I'd leave on my own. Only, I wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not before making one final decision. Because I had one thing left, and it was bigger than gratitude. It was bigger than motherhood. It was ownership. The first thing I did was bake a pie. Not because I was in the mood, not because anyone asked, but because rituals calm me, and because no one suspects you of plotting when your hands smell like cinnamon and brown sugar. While the crust cooled, I took the lockbox from the back of the closet. I'd kept it there all these years, behind old curtains, beneath a folded quilt my mother made before arthritis stole her grip. The key had rusted slightly, but it still turned. Inside, one original deed, 2 photocopies, and a legal folder with my name neatly typed in the corner. They'd forgotten, or maybe they never asked. The house was still mine. I sat there in the quiet, remembering all the times I deferred, gave more, asked for less. Not because I was afraid of holding power, but because I believed they'd never weaponize my kindness. That night, I didn't say a word. Instead, I started writing emails. The next day, while Daniel and his wife were out touring a pop-up gallery for inspiration, I called the real estate agent I used when we bought the house nearly 4 decades ago. He'd long since retired, but his son had taken over the firm. I introduced myself, told him I was exploring options. He asked for the address. There was a pause, then he said, "That place? That's prime now. I could have buyers lined up by Friday." "I don't want it messy," I told him. "No signs in the yard. No disruption to the family yet. Just paperwork." Quietly. He understood. 2 days later, I signed the listing agreement. By Sunday, we had a buyer. Cash, no contingencies. They wanted to close in 3 weeks. I didn't gloat. I didn't change anything in my routine. I still made breakfast. I still cleaned the guest bathroom after Daniel left his muddy shoes in the tub. I still picked up Ava from piano, but something inside me was humming. Not revenge, not triumph, just relief. The day I told them was Ava's birthday. They were hosting the party at the house. Balloons, cake, folding chairs in the backyard I once landscaped with my bare hands. I spent the morning stringing lights and cutting fruit. No one noticed the nice dress I wore. No one said thank you for setting the tables. They just asked if I could make sure the punch bowl stayed full. Halfway through the party, I slipped inside, quietly, calmly. I came back with a manila folder and set it on the kitchen counter. Daniel walked in minutes later, laughing with one of his colleagues. He froze when he saw me. "What's that?" he asked, glancing at the papers. I smiled. "The sale agreement," I said. "The house closes in 19 days. For a moment, he thought I was joking. Then he looked closer. The logo of the real estate firm, the buyer's name, my signature. His voice tightened. "What are you talking about?" "I'm selling the house, Daniel," I said softly. "It belongs to me. It always has." He blinked, stunned. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "You can speak to the agent directly," I continued. "The buyer has already wired the deposit. I made sure it was someone who respects historic homes. They'll take good care of it." You didn't tell us." "You never asked." His wife walked in, holding 2 champagne flutes. When she saw our faces, she stopped. I turned to her. "You might want to start looking at listings. Closing is on the 12th. She scoffed. "You can't be serious." "I'm more serious than you were when you planned to knock down my bedroom wall for a filming studio." She went pale. Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, this is insane. Where are we supposed to go?" "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said. "You've always made it clear you don't need me." Ava came running in just then, face flushed from laughter, holding a balloon in one hand and her birthday crown in the other. She stopped when she saw us. Daniel crouched down to block her view. "Go outside, honey. We'll be right there." But Ava looked at me. "Grandma, are you okay?" I smiled. Not a bitter smile, a real one, gentle, free. "I'm just finally making a change, sweet girl. Sometimes grown-ups have to do that too." She nodded, didn't ask questions. Just wrapped her arms around my waist before skipping back outside. Daniel's voice cracked. "You didn't have to do this." I looked at him. "I didn't want to," I said. "But you already decided I wasn't family. I just made it official." He didn't argue, not really, because there was nothing left to say. I stepped back, folded the manila folder closed, and left them standing there, surrounded by party favors and unspoken consequences. The next day, I called the moving company. I asked them to come while everyone was at work. I didn't want confrontation. I just wanted peace. By the time the sun set, everything that was mine had been packed and removed. The quilts, the photos, the small tin box full of crayon notes. I left behind the furniture, the dishes, the memories that had soured into silence. Before locking the door one last time, I stood in the center of the living room and whispered, "You should have known better than to build your future on someone you don't respect." Then I turned the key, slid it into an envelope for the agent, and walked away. There's something eerie about silence in a house that once buzzed with voices, especially when it's the silence of consequence. The morning after I handed over the keys, Daniel called me. I let it go to voicemail. Then again, and again. No message. Just a growing row of missed calls like a child pounding a locked door, unsure if they're being punished or simply ignored. By the third day, he sent a text. "We need to talk, please." That please was new. I waited. A week later, I got a call, not from Daniel, but from Ava's school counselor. Apparently, she'd had a meltdown in class. When asked what was wrong, she said, "My house is gone and no one will tell me why." It was the first time I cried since the sale, quietly, in my car, parked behind the bank. Not because I regretted what I'd done, but because Ava didn't deserve the fallout of her parents' pride. Later that evening, Daniel showed up at my new place. He stood at the doorway like a stranger, eyes swollen, voice soft. "Can I come in?" I nodded. He stepped inside and looked around. One bedroom, one plant, a kettle on the stove, no photos on the wall yet. "This is small," he said. "It's enough," I replied. He sat, rubbed his hands together. I was angry, still am, I guess, but I understand. You warned us. I just never thought you'd actually... He trailed off. "Choose yourself?" He looked at me then. Not like a child, not like a son, but like a man finally seeing the person behind the role. "I made things worse than they had to be," he said. "I let her push you aside. I didn't stop it. I'm sorry." I believed him. That part, at least. But sorry doesn't undo a season. It doesn't unroll the years like film in reverse. It doesn't move your things back into a home that no longer belongs to you. "What do you want from me now, Daniel?" "I don't know," he said. "Maybe not forgiveness. Just a way to start again. For Ava's sake, if nothing else." That name cracked me. She was the only one who'd never made me feel like a burden. The only one who saw me, even when no one else did. So I nodded. Slowly. "You can bring her by next Sunday," I said. "But just her." His eyes flickered, but he didn't push. As he left, he turned and said, "You were never useless, Mom. We were just blind." I didn't respond. Some truths don't need echoing. In the weeks that followed, word got out. Not from me, but from neighbors, cousins, a few too loud whispers at the grocery store. And for once, no one sided with Daniel. "Your mom did everything for that family," someone told him at work. "How'd you let it get that bad?" The donations his wife expected for her new content studio never came. Her social media page, once carefully curated with kitchen vlogs and family-first captions, was now filled with questions she refused to answer. "Didn't y'all just lose your house?" Wait, wasn't that her mom's place? She eventually deactivated the account. Daniel, meanwhile, took up a second job. They had to move into a rental farther from town. Smaller yard, no granite countertops, no garden, no help with school pickups, no warm meals waiting at the end of a rough day. He called once and said, "I didn't realize how much you were holding up." And all I could say was, "You didn't want to know." He never argued that. As for Ava, she visits often. She loves the tea I make and the tiny bookshelf I saved just for her. One afternoon, she asked me why I moved out. I thought for a long time, then said, "Because sometimes, sweet girl, when people forget your worth, you show them. Not by yelling, not by fighting, just by stepping away." She nodded, and in her own quiet, 9-year-old way, whispered, "I hope I never forget." I hugged her tighter than I meant to, because the truth is, I didn't want revenge. I just wanted clarity, accountability. And now I had both. Not in the form of screaming matches or lawsuits, but in Daniel learning to cook dinner. in his wife learning how hard it is to fold laundry with one arm while carrying a child in the other, in Ava looking up at me like I matter, not for what I do, but for who I am. That was justice, and it was enough. My new home is nothing like the old one. No grand staircase, no manicured lawn, no crown molding I once scrubbed with a toothbrush. But here, in this modest two-bedroom condo near the park, I can breathe. I can leave dishes in the sink without guilt. I can play the radio while I cook. I can sit in silence without being asked what's for dinner. There's peace in that kind of small freedom. Every Wednesday, I teach a little reading circle at the public library, a mix of kids from the neighborhood. I sit in a worn armchair with faded blue cushions and read aloud from books I used to borrow when Daniel was Ava's age. They listen closely, some of them curled up on the rug like cats, others doodling quietly but still listening. That part matters most, being heard without having to raise your voice. On Sundays, Ava visits. We make pancakes shaped like animals. She paints my nails different colors, one finger per shade. Last week she asked if I missed the old house. I told her, I miss what I thought it was, but not what it became. She nodded, and that was enough. Sometimes I see Daniel from a distance when he drops Ava off. He always lingers near the sidewalk, hands in his jacket pockets. He doesn't come in unless I invite him. I haven't, not yet. Some doors take time to reopen, and some stay closed for good. My husband, he visits more often now. We have coffee, talk about little things, his knee, the neighbor's loud dog, a recipe he messed up. He says he's sorry too, in his own quiet ways, like when he brings me groceries without asking, or when he tells Ava, "Your grandmother is the strongest person I know." I don't carry bitterness, not anymore. Bitterness is heavy, and I've carried enough already. But I do carry clarity, and that's light enough to hold in one hand. Sometimes I get letters, strangers who heard the story, who say things like, "I thought I was the only one. You gave me courage. My kids don't see me either, but now I see myself." To those of you watching, those who've been made to feel invisible, disposable, past your prime, I see you, I was you, and maybe right now, you're still sitting quietly at someone else's table, folding napkins they forgot to thank you for. Maybe your voice has gone quiet because no one listens. Maybe you're holding your breath, hoping that love will eventually remember you. Let me whisper this. You are not a burden. You are not background noise. You are not used up. You are still here, and that matters. Sometimes the greatest act of self-worth isn't yelling to be heard, it's standing up quietly and walking away, not to hurt anyone, but to stop being hurt. So if you've been waiting for permission to choose yourself, let this be it. And if this story reminded you of your own, I'd love to hear it in the comments. You're not alone. Share it with someone who needs a nudge, someone whose light's been dimmed too long. And if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe. Only if you want stories that remind you of your strength. Because I don't know who needs to hear this, but you're not too late. You're not too old. You're not done. You're just finally starting. And sometimes that's the bravest thing of all.